Even better. All right, we here.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the LiveWell Action Alliance podcast. We are so excited. It is May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. Hence our shirts. Give it to them, ladies. Courtesy of Dr. Woodley. And what do our shirts say? I'm going to read off of Dr. Woodley's shirt. So, it is okay to make mistakes, to not be okay, to have hard days, to be yourself, to not know it all, to ask for help, to start over, to need more time. Okay? A whole word on the shirt. So, welcome everyone. I'm Chantel. These are my lovely co hosts,
Tanya Phillips.
I'm Sarah Wise. Welcome, everyone.
and we have the lovely, Dr. Woodley in the house.
Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. We're so blessed to have you and excited. So I'm going to read a quick little bio on Dr. Woodley, and this is not going to do her justice. When I say Dr. Woodley is Superwoman, she is Superwoman, Wonder Woman. She is that girl, okay?
Yes.
So Dr. Lateisha Woodley is a top voice in education and has been highlighted as one of the nation's leaders to learn from. She was an alternative school student and has dedicated her life to working with at-promise students and school transformation initiatives. Her educational background includes a specialist degree in educational leadership and a doctorate degree in counseling psychology.
All right.
Okay. She has been a teacher, school counselor, school improvement specialist, assistant principal, and assistant superintendent. Since 2008, she has worked as a turnaround leader, helping to bring about positive changes in some of the lowest performing schools in Georgia and Missouri. She is currently the CEO of Dynamic Achievement Solutions, LLC, an international counseling and educational consulting firm where she is helping leaders transform schools around the world and working to develop trauma-informed communities around the country. Her research interests include comprehensive school improvement, alternative education, dropout prevention, trauma, and social and emotional learning. She is an international presenter, award-winning author, TEDx, featured presenter, an ASCD emerging leader, a mom, a glam mom, and a self-proclaimed lead dream builder. Welcome, Dr. Woodley.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
I'm excited to be here with you guys today.
Awesome. And what she did not mention is the amazing work that Dr. Woodley is doing with Ubuntu currently.
Absolutely.
And we are just so blessed to have her. So let's get right into it. Really quickly, we always want to shout out the Promise Career Institute. They have allowed us to record this lovely podcast in the building and facility. And a quick little tidbit of history, Dr. Woodley, would you like to share your connection to PCI?
Well, this is such a surreal experience for me. In this building, I was a student here as an alternative ed student. It was formerly known as Frank McLaren Success Academy, and I graduated from school here, and then I was blessed to have the opportunity to come back 20 years later and be the principal of the school and make a difference in the kids who walked down the same halls as I did.
Awesome. That's beautiful. So we're having a full circle moment here, and I'm here for it. Okay, well, speaking of, so let's get right into it. So we're going to be talking about mental health today, and really from a school-based perspective, especially with all of Dr. Woodley's rich experience. So we're going to get started talking about, let's talk about social media, Dr. Woodley.
Yes.
And from your experience, how do you see social media impacting youth? Do you think it's a positive or a negative or both? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, of course, anything overdone is always going to be a problem. And so, of course, there's some positive things that's happening with social media. Some people are doing some amazing work engaging students and families on, different topics who probably wouldn't have the information otherwise. So you have some positive when it comes to that, and that's uplifting, and connecting students with people around the world and getting to see different perspectives and all those exciting things that comes along with being a part of a global network. However, what we've seen is a lot of times social media has been used as a way to really affect students' socially emotional experiences. The judging, I remember, so many times there was an app or there was a social media post that would put a girl up and give her a score. She's a 1, she's a 10, she's all these different things. And so then it helps have students and especially young girls feeling, issues, with their own self-esteem and self-concept because they are being, feel like, compared to other people. And then, of course, for years and for centuries, we've dealt with the whole idea of what beauty is and that beauty standard. And so, of course, you have those different pieces. And this led to a lot of girls at young ages wanting to have plastic
Body
surgery
augmentation.
and all those different things because they feel like that's to live up to certain standards. But a lot of problems occurs in school when it's connected with social media and the whole idea of using social media, for not for positive reasons, to really to hurt instead of uplift.
Indeed, indeed. And one of the things that you were talking about that leads me into my next question, where you were mentioning how girls specifically, it's almost like they're seeking validation through what they're seeing on social media. So as an educator, as a parent, as a grandma, how would you suggest a parent, to help and approach their child, especially if we're talking about girls and their body image and that validation seeking stage? Like, how would you navigate a conversation?
So one of the first things I always say is, even when kids are very small, right, you start having conversation about your self-concept. Your self-concept is who you are, right? You get your eyes from your mama, your lips, your nose from your daddy, all those different things. And then sometimes even as adults, we are guilty of doing certain things that kind of affects a child's self-concept about who they are. So my grandchildren, for instance, I have one granddaughter who is more brown skinned, like her mom, and I have another granddaughter who's more light complected, right? And so I've had people to say, you know what, you're cute to be dark. You know what I'm saying? Oh, look at that cute little drop, a chocolate drop. You know what I'm saying? Those types of things. And so we don't even understand our own biases when it comes down to skin color, when it comes down to even, the little girls walking around like, oh, she's so chubby, da da da. Those different things, we may say that kind of help to, tear down a child's, self-concept about who they are as a person. So just being conscious of those things and make sure that we are uplifting the child at all times, to the point where, I try to make sure you're beautiful, you're amazing, always doing that uplift. So when they are faced with your negativity from the world or from the outside sources of social media, they've been built up so much, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't tear them down as much. But also being able to truly have conversations with them, right? Have conversations about certain things. My daughter, for instance, she, when she got to be in high school, she went through this phase where she wanted to add hair extensions, right? And I would say, you know what? I perfectly designed your body and your hair, your face, everything when you were born. You don't need anything extra, right? And Mom, you're perfectly, you don't need any hair extensions, you don't need any of that. And I didn't participate in that. I didn't purchase hair, things of that nature. So she would get a job, she had to buy her own hair extensions because I said, you're beautiful the way you are. So I always try to, make sure that I focused on not needing enhancements in order for you to be beautiful, because you're already beautiful. And so I think once we get to a space where we are very conscious about how we engage with students, with each other, about those particular things, that social media doesn't have, such a stronghold on children as well as adults, because you have adults that, are still trying to, measure up to certain unrealistic standards, and it affects their self-esteem or things of that nature, even when it looks at, oh, well, I see this person on social media that has $1 million house and a car and all those types of things.
No idea what kind of debt they in.
Exactly.
No.
And I'm not there yet, right? And so then I began to judge myself for being like, okay, well, there's something wrong with me because I'm not 30 years old and a millionaire, right? So being able to understand that everybody has their own journey, and you don't know the story behind that person, with that, that has the, some people have nice cars, have nice car notes, you know what I'm saying? I'm at a space in my life, but paid off is a whole lot better. It feels a whole lot better to me than brand new.
Absolutely.
But the whole idea of being able to really unpack what it is that we need to feel to be okay with who we are and our own personal journeys.
Yes, I love that. So I have a question for you. This is two-part. In your humble opinion, as an educator and a parent, do you feel that the current age restrictions for social media are appropriate? I believe on TikTok, I want to say you could be, 13 to get on TikTok, and I think Instagram, I think it's like, is it like
Instagram might be 12.
12?
I believe so. Some friends have Instagram.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What do you think is an appropriate age to engage in social media?
So I can tell you right now, like I said, social media causes a lot of concern when it comes down to schools and things of that nature. If you're going to have disciplinary problems or issues in schools, they're going to stem from something that happened on social media as being the culprit. Okay. So as a parent, I would limit. I cringe, and like I said, I'm a parent and a grandparent. So my grandkids, they'll come over with their cell phones, and they're 7 and 3, and their tablets. Right. And so when they get to my house, I'm like, what's going to happen, right? Yeah, we got to put it away, because I want you to be a kid. I want you to be able to play outside. I want you to be able to go and do different things. I want you to, to be able to be active. I want you to be able to have ability to be entertained without it being a device that entertains you. And so for me, I would limit a child's social media access and everything until high school.
High school, okay.
High school, because normally in high school you're you're having the ability to kind of engage in different things, and different programs are connected to social media, different sports and things, sports highlights. So those types of things kind of lead you into preparing you for adulthood. And I think it's important as a parent that you have an opportunity to monitor what the children are doing and how they engage and things of that nature before they are, released to be out of the nest. But elementary school and middle school is not a place for social media. And I know there's been a lot of legislation that's been trying to go forth to try to increase the age in which, children are able to do so. And even if you are a parent that feels like it's okay, or you feel like you monitor their tablet time or their air time, I still think you should limit the amount of time that they're on social media, because what we're finding is through research is that social media is addictive. And so that, you have children that are up at night, they're not sleeping, so that brain is not really being, nourished the way it needs to be nourished and things of that nature. And so it causes issues in the classroom, not only with behavior and social issues with their learning, their attention span and things of that nature when they're engaged so early on. So I think that there needs to be a conversation about, the health of, them being able to engage in those platforms at such a young age.
Okay, wonderful. And that brings me to my next question, because what I'm hearing you say is parents need to have boundaries.
Yes.
So what do boundaries look like for a teenager?
Yeah. So I think that's, a conversation, that you have to have, it has to be, and it's something that you have to think about as a parent. Because, sometimes, we have so much going on. You trying to, just trying to make ends meet. You're trying to get, do homework and all this kind of stuff. Then it's easy to give a phone, or it's easy to give a tablet so that you can focus on other things, right? So understand that. But, when you understand that the dangers that is presented by doing that, then it outweighs that whole peace of mind by just giving them something to keep them quiet. So I think that you have to identify, hey, what's important to me? And it may be, hey, you get your phone after you're done with your homework, after you're done with dinner. You can get, 45 minutes to an hour on your phone before going to bed. And then phones have to be turned into my room at night, so I can make sure you're going to sleep.
School.
Even in high school, I think it's important, that you have, that they're going to bed. They're not up all night, right, because they can't be their best selves in schools. So you have to say, hey, what is that time? What is appropriate? Hey,
I'm
you know,
showing
that
this
you do
episode
that.
to my sons.
Yeah.
Because they be trying to fight with me, Dr. Wu. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know high school.
Well,
I'm trying to be a junior. You
Well,
know,
that's
I'm sharing
fine.
my
Listen,
phone, and it's
so
like,
one thing that's really beautiful, you know, as a parent, you know, that pays their cell phone bill, you don't have to argue because all you just turn it off, you know, and it's off, right? And then hey, when it's time to come back on, it's back on, and right, you know, and so of course they're going to give you pushback. I mean, that's what children are supposed to do. They're supposed to push the envelope. They're supposed to see what, you know, test the boundaries and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, even though they may not be happy, you know, with you in the, you know, in the interim, you know, it's so, you know, the benefits of having grown children, you're able to now hear them go back and say things to their friends or to their children, the things that you've said to them, like, oh, but when I said it, there was a problem, right? But being able to, they'll understand that, you know, what you were trying to do and the benefits of that, you know, moving forward. You know, you think about, there's a plan for everything, right? If there's a plan to be successful, there's a, you know, and, you know, the successful people, hey, they're not spending 2-3 hours on social media. Right. So, hey, you know, what is it that you're, you know, what is it you want to accomplish in life? You know, I read somewhere where if you spend 1 hour a day working on your goal, then you're going to be the best of whatever it is that you're trying to become. Wow. You know what I'm saying? So think about wasting that hours that you're wasting on social media, and you focus that 1 hour on, hey, on something that's going to help propel you, or, you know, music or whatever your goal is in life, that you become the best at that, because 1 hour a day for X number of years, that's what you focus your attention on. And so being able to counteract, hey, your time to be able to put them in things that are going to help uplift them and get them where they want to go. And I never, you know, am one of those parents that are very authoritarian. You know, even as a mom, I would have meetings with my kids quarterly, and I was like, what can I do to be a better mom for you? Right? I get feedback because, hey, this is my first time being a mom. You know what I'm saying? I don't have all the answers. You know, what can I do better? You know, and they'll, you know, be funny, you know, crazy conversations we would have, but it allowed me to see where they were in their mindset about my parenting. And then I could say, hey, this is what's working for me for being your mom. This is not working for me. What can we do different? And being able to have those conversations. And I think having those open conversations where it's not that I'm dropping the hammer, but I'm actually trying to say, I have one opportunity on this earth to kind of help you accomplish whatever it is that you want to accomplish. And in order for us to do this, I'm giving you the tools that I know that's going to help you. And I need you to help me.
That's beautiful. So it's like a collaborative effort.
It's collaborative effort, you know, because, hey, it's their life, but you're trying to set them up for success. And you know, if you don't put boundaries in place, you don't put them in positions to be successful, and you allow them to be addicted to social media, addicted to gaming and all those different things, chances are they're not going to become the people that they want to become.
Right. And what's interesting is we don't even have the data right now to see what this is going to
Long
look
term.
like.
You know, because think about it. I think, was it late 90s, early 2000s when we began to engage with cell phones and you know, then social media and all these different things began to evolve. So we don't even know, the impact that this is going to happen on our, on us and on our children long term.
Right. And there's actually a legislation piece that we're going through. Shout out to Georgia Coalition for Education Justice, who sponsored this podcast. But it's called the Distracted Learners Act, if I'm not mistaken. And this is basically legislation to create consequences for having devices out in class. Yes. So I've read, we're working through it. We're dissecting it a little bit because there's some things that we're concerned about, especially as it relates to, Black and brown children, just to ensure, that they're, that there's no specific targeting, if that makes sense, just being cognizant of that. But anyway, the reason why I bring that up is and I understand why they're doing that, but that is their solution to the issue of distracted learners. So my question would be, from your experience as an educator, how do you think teachers and parents can work together to address this problem with devices and social media?
So one of the things that I always recommend when you're dealing with situations of this nature, and the legislation that I believe that you're talking about, is that they're saying cell phones in elementary and middle school are not going to be allowed. Only in high school can you have your devices, and then there's like some restrictions about devices at that time. I do believe that devices can be used as a tool in schools to, to kind of help connect students to the global, global access to learning things, AI tutors and all those types of things that are available to students. So I definitely feel like there's a balance that can be drawn with that. And I think the main issue that comes up is when when educators are saying that they're having difficulty controlling devices and device access, and students not staying on target and things of that nature. And so, there's some different pieces, some different technology that can be used to kind of create blackout spots in your classrooms and all kind of stuff. So, to be used in that regard. So I think that as an adults, we have to be more strategic in our approach. I don't believe in an all or nothing approach to anything. I believe in a moderation and how you go about doing it. But one of the great things that I always did as a principal that I think was very beneficial to me, and that is understanding, because sometimes as adults we think we have all the answers. Right? Instead of looking at our students as our customers and we're here to serve them, and having conversations with them about this, what is the problem? And this is why we feel like we have to create a rule. Yeah. And then how do we work together to make it happen? Right. So, for example, one of the big things when I was a principal was kids wearing the hoods on their heads, the hoodies, right? And everything. And so I had a meeting with my students, and I was like, hey, here's the hoodies, not only the hoodies and the headphones. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, so think about, as an administrator, there's an emergency in this building, right? You are in the hallway, you have a hoodie on, so I can't see who you are, don't know if you belong here, you don't belong here, right? You had the headphones in your ears, so if there's something that's happening, how am I going to notify you that there's an emergency, that you're not safe, and you can't hear me, right? So do you understand my dilemma? So it's not that I am trying to,
police what you wear.
Correct, any of that. I just want to make sure that I'm in a space that you're able to be safe and I can keep you safe, right? And so can we agree that these are the things that we're going to do and when we're going to do it, right? Mm. And so we begin to have conversations as why they needed to have the hoodie and why they needed to have the headphones, and came up with some different parameters. Hey, so if you're in a lunchroom and you're able to see, spaces, and you're able to see adults, you're able to see what's going on. Hey, like before school, you're waiting for your parents or whatever. Maybe those are spaces, but walking back and forth in the hallway when there's all this, promotion, is that a good space? No. So we begin to have conversations about what does that look like, right? Mm-hmm. And so, the same thing with cell phones. And then we're able to say, hey, in cell phones, we use them for class and blah, 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 blah. If we're not using the cell phones, then there's a charging port over here. So everybody come in the classroom, you put your phone on the charging port. Mm-hmm. And then if we're doing an assignment that allows you to be able to utilize your cell phone, then you're able to get your cell phone, right? But if we see that you're not able, if you don't, plug your phone in, then your phone is going to go to the office and you're not going to have access to it to the end of the day. You know what I'm saying? But you're able to say, hey, you're able to have your phone at sometimes, mm-hmm. When it's time and when it's appropriate, right? Mm-hmm. You're able to have your cell phone during lunchtime, where you're able to hang out with your friends or before school or after school. So being able to look at different situations where you can create collaborative, consequences or collaborative ways that you can engage the students and the families about the why. And mm-hmm. It's not always, hey, it's my way or the highway. Mm-hmm.
I love that, because I did wonder with this particular legislation, were parent voices involved mm-hmm. in it at all? And I'd be curious to see, because it did pass through the Senate, mm-hmm. and I'm not sure if the governor signed it yet. Maybe I'm not sure, but it's going to happen. Yeah. So I'm
pretty sure it's going to happen. But one thing I did like about the bill, it did say it did give school districts the leverage to implement it as as they see, fit for their environment. So we're going to probably see different, you're going to probably have some extremes that says cell phones not even allowed on property, and then you're going to have some leeway.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
see,
it's
that
just,
gets muddy real quick.
yeah,
so.
it can get real muddy.
Yeah,
So.
and it's going to be, because like I said, we're trying to figure things out, but it takes a very, a strategic leader to kind of navigate these particular waters in order for you to, really, do what's in the student's best interest, but also understand that, there's positive uses for technology. And sometimes a cell phone is the only technology that a child has access to.
Yeah, nowadays we act like we're going to die without a cell phone. This
I
is
know, we turn
crazy.
around and go back home and pick it up if we,
Yes,
so.
it's crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you for that, Dr. Lee. So now we're going to switch gears to talk about the generational gaps, if you will, in mental health.
Yes.
So my first question to you would be, what do you notice now from your experience as not just an educator, but even as just a person, what are you noticing between the generational gaps as it relates to how we handle mental health? Our youth now and you as in your generation and maybe your children's generation. So what are you noticing?
Well, one thing, I'm excited. I'm excited that we have the language, right? Because so many times I know when I was growing up, I didn't have the language of that I'm depressed. Like that was not a part of my vocabulary or even my understanding of my emotions. There was not really a lot of education around feelings and emotions and all those types of things. You just knew that there was a problem, it was wrong, you didn't feel, you felt different, you were sad, but there was not language around the different things. Also, there was, even though you had family members that struggled with mental illness, there was not language around what they were experiencing. You knew that there was a problem, but you didn't have the language. And so, and a lot of times it was shunned to even talk about it, so, if mama was depressed and, the house was a wreck and we didn't have food and all these different things, she couldn't get out of bed. It was something that you just didn't talk about. Like you didn't talk about, the mental illness. You didn't talk about those things. So I'm happy now that, as we are seeing in the last 10 years, there's language around it and kids are able to say their emotions. There's been a lot of focus in this particular areas about, understanding your social, emotional needs and, being able to express, how you're feeling and what you need and things of that nature. So I'm excited about that space. There's still a lot of stigma when it comes to mental health and mental illness. And what I've seen, what saddens me, even though we do have the language, there's a lot of people of color, Black and brown communities that really, even though we have the language, they still kind of have that stigma on going and get help and getting support. So what I'm seeing is a lot of individuals that are self-medicating with marijuana, with alcohol, with other things, even more so today because marijuana is now considered to be acceptable, more so than it has been in the past. And so, so I'm seeing that has been, on the rise. And what we do know based on research that marijuana started at a young age can affect the developing brains of children. And so we're seeing the output of that coping mechanism of trying to, self-medicate instead of getting properly diagnosed and getting, not even medication management, but even counseling or changing your diet, all these different things, exercise, different things you can do to stimulate the brain, to balance the brain chemistry in order for you to, lead a life that is not as, challenging.
Right. And, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but when you mention marijuana use, it just reminded me, my kids are constantly coming home telling me about the vaping.
Yes.
Like that vaping is a thing. They're literally, they coming to school and they're getting high.
Yes.
And I've even seen at the bus stop, they rolling up.
Yes.
I'm like,
And
what
it's
are we, what are we suppressing? Or like, what are we, you know what I mean? Like, what is that?
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is, they understand that they don't like the way they feel and they want to feel different, right? And so, the main thing is, is understanding that and understanding where they are and being able to put things in place to be able to say, hey, when I was a principal, and the first thing I would do is I would have meetings with every child and every child's family to find out where the issues, where the concerns, and be proactive about putting things in place. And if my students were using marijuana, to self-medicate, I had a smoking cessation class in the school so that they could learn other coping mechanisms where they didn't have that to have to be their only go-to to be able to deal with their emotions. And so being able to have those conversations and not it being a situation where I'm talking down to you, like those types of things. But the issue of the matter is, okay, number one, it's an expensive habit. Number two, do you know how this is affecting your brain? Are you okay with that? And number three, do you want to do something different? And being able to say, hey, these are some ways that you can cope, and you don't have to use substances to be able to do it. Because anything that you are depending on and you have to have on a daily basis or a regular basis, is an addiction. And then you don't want to be addicted to anything.
Yeah, we got to call it what it is. So that brings me to my next question. So back to the generational aspect of things. How, from your experience, how would you say generational differences and cultural differences impact a student's willingness to ask for help?
Yes. So, so it's, they have all these memes on social media about, the different parenting styles, the Generation X, Generation Z, and all the way we would do things differently, as far as parenting and things of that nature. And of course, a lot of times, parents, they've dealt with with depression and all those different things differently. You know what I'm saying? Some, there's, research that talk about workaholism as being a form of, you know what I'm saying, a trauma response, of how a way of avoiding dealing with your emotions and things of that nature when you work all the time, right? The whole, how we respond, anger and all these different things. And the one thing that I do love, and when I think about our different generations and understanding, there's a book called The Body Keeps Score, and it talks about, and then you can actually see how, mental health and, affect our physical health. And you see, a lot of times, based on different adverse childhood experiences, how family members respond to that and therefore have, medical issues. My family, like I grew up in poverty, right? And I had a lot of issues and a lot of things going on. And my grandmother had 7 kids, and 4 out of the 7 were girls. 2 of my aunts died before age of 50, and 1 died at 60, right? And so when you're talking about how these adverse child experiences affect you for the long term, I see it, not only in the patients that I work with, but also in my own family, and how it's important for us to understand that we need to seek support and seek help to kind of see how do we change the trajectory, so it's not passed down from generation to generation to generation. And being able to, be an example about how do we get support, and then, make sure that our children are able to get the support that they need. But when we talk about generational, depends on, who the family is and the culture is. It may be, one of the things I love to say is, hey, I grew up in a very religious family, right? And so when you had a problem, you're just supposed to pray about it.
Okay.
Right? And so, I've done a couple workshops in churches, and I say, okay, we need to pray about it and call our therapist, right? Because if your child has a heart defect, you're going to go to a cardiologist. You're going to pray to God that he heal their heart, but you're also going to go to a cardiologist for the cardiologist to actually assess what's going on and provide a treatment plan. Right. So why would you not do the same thing if your child has a chemical imbalance in their brain, right? Why would going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist be any different than that? And so being able to have that conversation about being able to, marry spirituality and psychology to become, something that we need. And so that's one of the biggest things that I see when it comes to the stigma is, talk to Jesus about it or pray about it and things of that nature. And then the whole misnomer right? That, and this is something else that's new to this generation. And my generation are people that are older than me. I'm saying, 25 plus, no, no, 40 and above. It was what goes on in this house stays in this house, right?
Yes.
And so you don't talk about what's happening in this house, no matter if it's abuse, no matter if it's I'm hungry, no matter if my lights are off. Like, you don't talk about what's going on in this house. And now, in the age of social media, everybody tell everything, right? Parents get on, my lights are off. You know what I'm saying? So it's a little bit more, people a little bit more open to have conversations that are that used to be things that wasn't
Taboo.
discussed in public. So we are seeing, like I said, I'm excited about the language. I'm excited about people not being ashamed to be able to say, hey, I'm experiencing something that is traumatic for me, and I want to reach out and ask for support. And I'm hoping that we're able to experience this more and more. However, what we do know is that there is a lack of mental health professionals, especially mental health professionals of color, available for the demand that's out there. So with people are now saying, hey, yay, I need help, sometimes the waiting list for them to get help is sometimes challenging. And so, we're having to balance that.
Wow.
So, that was a lot. That was heavy. Goodness, just to realize that. So I'm glad have a career. I will have a career in mental health. I'm super excited about that.
Yes.
So my next question would be, and as we all work in community, and just thinking of us as families and also the school community, how can we kind of bridge I would say this intergenerational gap so that we create safe spaces for our children to say, hey, I'm not doing well.
Yes. I love that. And so one of the things that I love to do is about, developing trauma-informed communities. And that is working with, the people, the powers that be, the mayor's office, the commissioner's office, the health departments, the YMCA's, the Boys and Girls, anybody that touches children, right? For them to be trained in adverse childhood experiences and understanding the cycle of trauma, right? For them to understand how their approach could totally, help elevate a family or totally, push families back. I love to do workshops, like I said, across the community on those different pieces to kind of bring people in, to parent workshops for them to understand their own ACE score and their own adverse child experiences and how they are affecting their parenting, and then how they can do different to kind of support their children. Working with, like I said, individuals that work with families and that that are experiencing different things and how they could better support the families and children that they serve is something that I think is the work that's needed in this time and the work that I love to do and enjoy doing, because like I said, we've got to be able to provide people with the information needed in order for us not to continue the cycle of our children not being okay. Working with grandparents raising grandchildren, right? And being able to work in different capacities, but being able to unpack, hey, where is it that we need to support? Where is it that we need to have those critical conversations? And how do we begin to elevate the conversation through all our community interactions so that we all are getting what we need and our children are well?
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you, Dr. Woodley. Okay. So the next questions that we have, and I guess I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Okay, so I think that one of the beauties of your vast array of experience is that you have existed in all these different environments. Yes. And so we know that you've done work here in Atlanta. We know that you've done work in Missouri. We also know that you've done work on the continent. And I'm really interested in how the work that you've seen abroad, the work that you've done abroad, how do we bring culturally competent mental health to our communities here, and how do those communities parallel? So like when you look at mental health in Atlanta versus in Ghana or Nigeria or wherever you travel.
Yes, well, I am so grateful, like I said, that God has allowed me to work with children all across the world. And so what I've learned through that experience is children are children, right? No matter if they're in Ghana, in South Africa, in the Caribbean, or you're in Europe, they all have needs. And what was so powerful, especially after COVID, I've done a lot of extensive travel and being able to have conversations with kids about how, the whole experiences and things affected them and their mental health, and having conversations. And so what I've learned is that every school has its own DNA, every community has its own DNA, and so we can't do a one-size-fits-all model when it comes to supporting children and families, right? And I truly believe that every community has what it needs to heal itself if given the resources to do so. And so being able to go into community, right? So I never go into community with a toolbox and say I'm a hammer over here, a screwdriver over here. I go into community and I actually listen to community, right? I find out what are the support mechanisms available in that community, right? Is there a healer that people go to in that community? Same thing, is there connection with church in that community? You know what I'm saying? What is the comfort pieces that we able to kind of pull together? What are the things that are available in that community to kind of help create spaces? And so one thing that I found that has been most effective, and what research says, is that students are going to be more apt to go to other students for support before they will come to adults.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And so being able to equip the peers
The culture.
with the understanding, I've been unfortunate enough to have students who have died, in schools and things of that nature. And what I do know for sure is other students had some information about what was happening before it happened, right? And but they didn't know what to do with that information. And so one of the key pieces that I have used is creating a systematic approach to address the needs of students and families within communities, right? So I began to work through, hey, what supports do I need to have for adults?
Okay.
Right? What supports do I need to have for children? Okay. How do they be trained to be able to know and be able to identify not only how they identify their own emotions, but when their friends are experiencing different things, and how to get, help their friend navigate to get the supports that they need. Also, what I've learned is in all communities, there are resources available that people don't know about and don't utilize to the highest. And so being able to be a connector and create those, what I call asset mapping, in communities, to pull those assets together so that people know what assets are available in the community, how to connect with those particular assets in order for them to, maximize their ability to transform the community. And I've just seen it time and time again when we come together in community, when we, make a decision to support and uplift our children and make sure that we are identifying and looking at, the child wellness index and where the problems are, then we're able to truly maximize and make a difference. And so, but no certain place that, there's no magic bullet, but you're able to know based on my different experiences of being able to say, okay, these are, a needs assessment. These are the different aspects that we need to consider. And then how do we maximize what that community has to offer? Because there are people within the community that's already are staples in that community that's going to help lift the work forward. And we need to go to that common denominator in that community to help shift the environment in order for them to get the results that they need.
Listen, she clearly knows what she's talking about. Okay, because what I heard you say that I thought was so poignant was that when you enter into these spaces, no matter what community it is, you're coming with this approach of curiosity, right? This space of learning.
Yes.
As an educator, you're entering into these spaces as a learner first and understanding what is necessary. I think that's profound. And so then when you started talking about how children are able to communicate their mental health needs to their peers, what I heard you talking about is cultivating a culture amongst our communities where our children feel safe to speak to each other, where they understand the language and have the language amongst themselves that they can exchange, and kind of building these safe spaces. That kind of blew my mind. Okay. So my second question is, how can we elevate these student voices to design the school-based mental health services? So while we have this culture that children feel safe communicating with each other, how do we elevate that experience to the space where we as adults can hear it and see it and understand what is needed?
Yep. So a couple things. One, there's several trainings that could be that are available to students. One of which is a training I do called Teen Mental Health First Aid,
Okay.
where they develop these certifications or becoming certified in this space where they're able to have a clear understanding of what they need to do and be able to understand their own emotions first, and then how to navigate the space, the political space of schools, as well as community, as well as parents, and all those different pieces. They understand how to navigate those adult spaces.
Yeah.
Then one of the wonderful things, that I've been able to engage in, and there's programs like the Morehouse School of Medicine's peer leadership program,
Okay.
where we take teenagers now and actually put them in spaces where they're doing public service announcements and things of that nature, and they are the voice in their schools to kind of
Wow.
elevate conversations. They're elevating conversations about mental health, about sexually transmitted diseases, about all making good decisions and things of that nature. But the voice is not the adults leading the space, it is the children leading the space and having conversations about the issues and things that matter most to them. And I think that this is so very important, because as we are looking at cultivating community, we've got to be able to create that space where students know how to, first of all, find their voice, you know what I'm saying, and then utilize their voice in order for them to be able to continue conversations. So many times, especially generationally, we tell children they should be seen and not heard, and so their voices become stifled, and then they become adults with voices that are stifled. And so we don't want to do that. So we want to be able to, let them know and understand that it's important for their voices to be heard, and that their voices be heard in a way to make a difference. And so being able to create the youth leadership aspect is something that all communities really need to really invest in.
Yeah.
And so I do a lot of work in that space, going in and creating peer leadership spaces within schools for those students to be able to have an opportunity to do so. And there's work that we've done in the community as well. But, that's something, student voice is not something that's always, I would say, accepted, by, certain leadership. And so just finding a way to, let the adults know how important this is. And, with parent support, I think that we could get more programs like this, off the ground and really, push our students to be able to utilize their voice effectively.
Yeah, that reminds me of restorative justice, which you just described in helping children, helping there be a hierarchy, right? Where there is a place for you to bring these ideas, but also to be heard. Reminds me a lot of restorative justice, which is something we deal with outside of the mental health space when we're talking about behavioral and those kinds of things. And so that's interesting, and thinking about how some of these ideas around nutrition, restorative justice, they all tie in. We're
It's
all linking
intertwined.
together.
All just part of vital conditions, of course, because we do know that, when you talk about nutrition, how, if a child is not getting the proper nutrition, how it can affect their mental health.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I never forget, one of the things I would hate, oh my goodness, it would drive me absolutely crazy, is my babies coming to school with hot Cheetos and red soda. That would be their breakfast, right? And so knowing that is not nourishing to the brain, knowing what the damage is doing to the body, all those different things, just totally would break my heart. And then especially right now in this spaces where, free lunch programs and things of that nature are looking to be cut based on the new agenda from the legislature, it was important that, even back then when we had, money and supports, that I reached out to the community, and we would work with people like Mr. Bobby down in College Park at the Urban Forum, right? And he would bring in fresh fruits. So in the morning, students could grab, an apple or orange or, some type of fruit, to eat in the morning versus the hot Cheetos and the red sodas. But understanding, most of our kids that we serve are living in food deserts. And so what you have is those local convenience stores who has that information. Also, it's very expensive to eat healthy, right? It's very expensive to have fresh fruits and vegetables. So, I don't blame families, because they're buying the food that they can afford, to make sure that the kids don't starve. Correct. And access to, because if you don't have a car, you got to, catch buses and trains to get to a grocery store to get food and then, trek it back. And so, I've been there. I've been in the space where not having a car, me and my family had to walk where we had to go to get food and things of that nature. So I definitely understand, and I'm not trying to, and I any means, try to, to downplay a parent that will send their child to school with hot Cheetos and red soda. But the issue of the matter is we know that it's a problem and it's not really benefiting the child physical health nor their mental health if they're not eating the proper foods that provide them with those nutrients.
Definitely. I think that what you're talking about is a communal standard and understanding what is nutritionally valuable for your child and what is not. And I think that a lot of times our communities just don't have that information.
Correct.
We understand that you got to send your child to school with food.
Correct.
And so I'm going to get that done. And
Correct.
so understanding that there is a step beyond that we need to take is some education that we all need to make sure that we are passing and taking
And
in.
resources.
And resources for sure. I'm wondering about school spaces. So as you know, I was an educator for a couple years, and the school space is such an interesting space for me. I started teaching when I was 21.
Yes.
I was teaching high schoolers, but then you also have educators who are 50, 60, right? Like are good, seasoned. I'm here for a long time. I'm going to see it through.
Yes.
How do we have these mental health conversations between these different generations? So we have folks who are maybe our parents' age who are of the generation of, baby, you need to make sure you were at church. Have you prayed this week?
Yeah.
What have you journaled? Yeah. And then we have folks who are maybe closer to our age who are like, I'm going to take you to yoga class. Let's go meditate, Yes. And then we have people who are my sister's age who's 20 now who's like, girl, I'm going to get you a reading. You need to go get a reading. So how do we kind of have these conversations from all of these different places so that we're reaching all of our different community members?
So I think one of the main things is a space for all of it, right? There's a space for all of us in this community together. And so one of the great things that I was able to do when I was an assistant superintendent, that no matter if you were the cafeteria worker or you was the bus driver, you was a teacher, you was administrator, or even the superintendent of a school district, everyone in the school are required to do a trauma-informed training to be able to know and understand their own lived experience, right? And then be able to say, hey, how do I understand the cycle of poverty? How do I understand adverse childhood experiences as it relates to the students that I serve? How do I create trauma-informed environments? And so we did trainings for everyone that was a seasoned teacher that was in the building, but every new person that actually got a job in the school district, the first day they got their badge, the second day they were in training about trauma-informed practices and things of that nature. And so we were intentional about making sure that not only was our children well, but our educator was well, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And so we put things in place where our educators were able to get help for themselves and get free therapy sessions that did not have to do anything with their medical insurance. But like this, you got 6 free sessions per year before you even had to utilize your health insurance. And not only for you, anybody that lived in your household was able to get these sessions, because sometimes it is, hey, I'm a caregiver, right? I'm 50, right? And I think I'm okay or whatever, but now not only am I having to navigate work and children, now I have a parent that's aging. And so now I'm trying to navigate all these different spaces. And I'm trying to be all the things to all the people, and then I'm finding myself not being as happy as I normally would have been. And so understanding those spaces, because everybody is different, and what we experience and how we show up in the world. And so being intentional about not only creating programs and things to support the students and the families that we serve, but the actual people that's doing the service. Secondary trauma is so real, right? Because vicarious trauma, when you are in situations and you're working with people that have a lot of needs, right? And a lot of us work in high needs environments. It's easy to kind of take on all of that and kind of keep pushing your stuff down. I remember being a principal of this great, in this great building. And, my babies, 99.9% of them had adverse childhood experiences and a lot of issues and a lot of things going on. Right. And I loved every minute of it. Like, I loved my babies. I loved my staff and everything. And I poured everything I could into the people that work with me every day, as well as the students and families that I served. Right. But I wouldn't even take off to go to the doctor for myself because I didn't want to be outside of the building and a student needed me or something needed me. Like, I would hate to even go to meetings at the district office because I wanted to be in my building. I wanted to be with my babies. I wanted to be with, because it was like a family. And so I began to have medical issues. I began to have ulcers. I ended up having tumors. I ended up having all this type of thing. And then I never forget, when when I started having all these pains and the doctor was like, listen, either you're going to get this taken care of or they're going to be rolling you out of that building, right? And so I ended up having to have surgery and having to be off work for a while. But I neglected, and so many women, have done that. I mean, we neglect ourselves for our families, our children, our jobs, all these different things because we're busy trying to climb the ladder and be all the things to all people. And so that's why it's so important for us to be able to create trauma-informed work environments, right? And so I do a wonderful workshop, and I did this workshop at the Urban League, talk about, creating trauma-informed workspaces where you don't understand and know what's going on. What are the signs and symptoms that your work, your workforce is not well, right? And and my title of it was CEOs Need Therapy Too, right? Because we're so busy, trying to do all the things and be all the things where you don't take the time to make sure what's going on. Is your staff productivity low? Chances are they got something else going on, right? Or their attendance is a problem and different things. Being able to see the signs and symptoms that, that you are not, leading a trauma-informed workforce.
That is so, I think that I've never heard the term secondary trauma, but I think that is so interesting, and I can see how that leads to the term we know of burnout when we talk about educators. For me, I entered into education so young and not having a clear understanding of my own mental faculties and stuff, and so that burnout came fast for me. And so what does that look like for parents, right? So just as educators can enter into adulthood and start your career or whatever and kind of realize like, oh, wait, there are some things I still need to address. What does that look like for parents who find ourselves on the parenting journey? We have little ones or big ones now, and we're realizing something's happening in our brain. How does that show up in our school environments with our babies, and what can we do to address those needs?
Yeah, well, we do know that, when a lot of times as parents, we feel like we are hiding things from our kids because we are like, Mommy has it under control, right? But they are watching you and they're seeing your energy. They're seeing how you navigate. They're seeing how short you are when they do something and all those different pieces. And I think that, again, we take the whole mindset of, I used to say, I got to schedule a nervous breakdown because I ain't got time right now, right? I'll schedule time for that, but right now I got to get this in, right? And then what ends up happening is you keep scheduling and you keep rescheduling the breakdown, and then the breakdown is going to happen whether or not you schedule it out. Yeah. So needless to say, just really understanding that you've got to you have to take care of you in order for you to be the best that you need to be for for your children, right? And even as an educator, like I would tell my staff, hey, if you need to have not a nervous breakdown, if you need to have a mental health day, don't come in here stressing my kids out. Just say, Dr. Woodley, I need to have a mental health day or whatever. We'll work it out. We just want you to come back better. You know what I'm saying? And the sad thing about it is, as adults, we're able to, maybe, sometimes we're like, well, I can't even afford to take a day off because I can't afford to miss money because I got to pay these bills. But as adults, for the most part, we're able to say, okay, I'm not okay. I can't show up right now, but our kids don't have that, right? I had, a situation that one of my kids got robbed on the way to school, and he was just sitting there in math class, and, and I'm like, I promise you, if I got robbed on the way to work, I'm gonna have to take me a mental health day to get my life right. But what I'm saying is, even no matter what, I mean, even if it's death in their family or whatever's going on, the lights are off, they're sleeping in the car, all these different things. More than likely, that child, no matter what that parent is going through, that child is gonna go to school, right? And they don't have that. So you're gonna see the outpour from what's going on, those stressors in the family. You're going to see that show up in the classroom because there's no other space for the children to show up, for that to show up. And so being able to look at it, I have the honor and the privilege to love these babies through this is something that we have to reframe my thought process. Then, I got these kids with all these problems. You know what I'm saying? Just reframing our thought process that it is an honor and a privilege to serve these babies and to help them navigate the challenges that they're going through. And I think if we go through with our mindset of that piece and understanding that, hey, say, hey, Miss so-and-so is having a bad day, too, whatever, let me help you navigate, and just being able to be human. One of the things that I know is a major concern with parents in schools is when parents are going through stressors and things of that nature, sometimes the schools actually add an extra layer of stress and pressure on those families because they feel like they have a duty to report when, say, if a child comes to school not dressed like, they're not clean, maybe have some, they're smelling, maybe they're saying they're hungry.
Or they're late. Or
Correct. They're sleeping, class, things of that nature, and parents are not, able to be as present as schools would like them to be. Sometimes they'll go through the process of reporting to Department of Family and Children Services. Sometimes that adds an extra layer of pressure to the family. And so I also do a workshop with schools about, are you hotlining poverty? Right? What systems do you have in place, through your social support system, your social workers, to put things in place where you have a, clothing closet, food pantry, those types of things to kind of help uplift families. Are you working within communities to be able to maybe, work with displaced families that are maybe, getting evicted? They can have a place to stay temporarily. What systems of support do you have in place to help these families navigate before we get to the level of reporting to the Department of Family and Children Services? So that takes a mind shift about how do we engage, and develop, trauma-informed communities where we're able to create, a community school model.
That is so interesting. Yeah. Because that must be a conflict. Like, I know educators and folks, like, they're mandated reporters. And so there is this, okay. She keep blowing my mind. All right. My next question is kind of taking it back to nutrition. We spoke about food.
Yes.
As an educator, as an administrator in education, can you talk to me about the role that you see food playing in the school culture? So I understand the school space to often be the second safe space in a lot of children's lives. And I know that when we think about inclement weather and things like that, the school is where a lot of children depend on for their main meals and things like that. How can we creatively expand the quality and the nutritional value and communal value that we are delivering through nutritional services? Yeah. So currently we offer, we have a breakfast and a lunch program and a snack program. But what do you think it would take to really create more communal food experiences for our parents and for the larger communities?
I think that whole idea of looking at school as a community school model and tapping into the community resources, like I shared with one of my great community partners when I was a principal, was the urban farm, right? Where we were able to have, fresh fruits and vegetables that was provided for through that program, right? Being able to have a, food pantry where parents were able to come, get food and things when they needed food and things, and not, food that were unhealthy, but foods that were, nutritious meals and things of that nature. And so being able to create those communal spaces, a lot of times we have resources in the community, but we expect for the parents to go out to those particular resources. But creating a one-stop shop, you know the parents have to drop the kids off or come to the school, but why can't we create this space where we have everything we need right there in the space?
Yes.
Where we have doctors that come to do, dental visits. We got doctors that come do the well checks for students right at school. The parents don't have to get off work. The kids don't have to miss school. They go, for their 20, 30-minute appointment and go right back to class instead of missing a whole day of school. Have food, like the food pantries and things of that nature, have food available so the parents, as they pick up the kid, can get food and things that they need, for their families. So creating those, community schools models where you have a one-stop shop for everything that a family needs right there in that space, and we're not having to, deal with transportation issues and time issues of them taking off work to be able to engage and have the resources that they need. And so the kids don't have to suffer. I think is going to be the key.
Okay.
The other piece is, right now we're dealing with a legislative mindset about the benefits versus the profit that goes along with profiting off of food and nutrition that our kids serve. So I think that we're going to have some issues with that. I think in America, period, the food that we eat, we know that it's full of preservatives and all those types of things, and we have not been educated on what is considered to be healthy, because things that we thought was healthy for us, now we're finding out that it may not have been the best thing for us. And so really unpacking and really having clear conversations about, foods and, what is, foods that are natural, organic, and what foods are lab created, and all those different things are going to be conversations that's going to have to be elevated. And so will we ever get over the whole profit margins that kind of go along with that? I'm not sure, but we can, I believe, through working with our local farmers to be able to create partnerships with schools. I think that we can at least move in the right direction.
Definitely.
Love that.
Definitely. All right, my last question, y'all. My last question. Do you have any recommendations of small habits that we can implement as parents, as folks around children, to really make sure that we are driving home this idea of communal mental health? So what are some things that we can be doing with our children in the car? You know what I mean? When you meet somebody, like how can we connect on a regular basis?
So the car is the best place, right? The best place, because they're locked in. They can't go anywhere, you know what I'm saying? Especially if you got them cell phones. But anyway, you're able to kind of engage in conversations with them. And so it's the best place to be able to drop nuggets, to have conversations. But, for me, it's always a part of, being able to help them to identify their emotion, number one, and then being able to talk through, okay, so how did you respond to that? Because so many times we expect our little bitty babies to be mini adults, right? We teach them how to tie their shoes, we teach them how to walk, but we don't teach them how to manage their own mental health, right? And so we've got to be able to say, okay, you're having big feelings right now. You know what I'm saying? When the child is not, so let's talk about that. How are you feeling in your body? You know what I'm saying? And so when you have these feelings in your body, what are some different ways that you can respond? And so that's I think is the most important piece. I encourage every parent to take parenting classes, right? We have to take a class to get our driver's license or whatever, but we don't have to do that when it comes to parenting. And so sometimes we parent the way we were parented, and our parents did the best job they can do with the information that they had. But that does not mean that was the best information that they could have passed on, right? So the main issue of the matter is, let me explore, what type of parent do I want to be? What are some things that I want to do? One of the most important things that I did, when my son had my first grandchild, I looked at myself as a grandparent and said, what is my role, right? What is the role that I want to be? What experiences that I want to give? What is the pieces that I want to import into my child's life, right? Being able to take a moment, just take a pause and just think about that. And then once I know that I want to make sure that my children are well-read, well-rounded, well in all these different areas, right? Well spoken, all those different things. How do I create environments for them to be able to do that, right? If I want to be well spoken, I can't tell them to shut up all the time, right?
It's so true.
You know what I'm saying? Sit down with your ugly self. You know what I'm saying? I can't expect for them to have, a positive self-esteem and a self-awareness about themselves.
Yeah.
You're crazy just like your daddy. You know what I'm saying? I can't expect for them to walk around with you. But these are things that we hear all the time, right? And so being able to understand, hey, if I want my kids to walk in confidence, to have self-love, to be able to have a positive self-concept and self-esteem about themselves, as a parent, what are the things that I need to make sure they're hearing from me on a regular basis? What is it that I need to be modeling? Because kids will learn more from watching you than from actually hearing you. Because if you respond a certain way in a crisis, guess what? When they're in a crisis, they're gonna be cussing and fighting too. Right? And so begin to understand that how do I want my kids to show up in the world, then what am I modeling for them? And so sometimes it's going to take I need to work on this. And it's okay for you to tell your kids, Mama don't have it all together, Mama don't have it all together, but I'm trying to do da-da-da-da-da. And this is my intention. And so having those check-ins with your kids to be able to say, hey, we're going to have, if you have daughters, mother-daughter day, we're going to go to the park and we're going to have some conversations. You know what I'm saying? Different things. My son, I required him when he got in middle school, he had to start taking me out on dates. Right? Because I wanted to have conversations about how he would treat young women. How would you plan for a date? What a conversation. So I would have him plan dates. You know what I'm saying? You got $10. How you going to take the young girl out? You know what I'm saying? How would you do those different things?
What year was that, Dr. Woodley? Because it's 2025.
Same thing. You got $10. I mean, you're going to have less than $10 right now with this economy. Okay. So being able to say, hey, I got $10. How am I going to make this special for the young lady to let them know that I care, right? Okay. But being able to have those conversations about those different pieces in order for us to be able to elevate our ability to engage in those pieces.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I love all of the intention that you put into all of your work, and all it's evident in all of your answers. So Tanya's going to ask us a couple questions about behavioral health in schools.
Yeah, so we got behavioral health in schools and family support.
Okay, all right.
So one of the things, so thank you so much, because this has been fabulous, quite frankly. So rich, so just full and just beautiful answers that are really kind of blowing our minds. I mean, I'm just being, real with that. Yeah. But so one of the questions I have is, how can schools shift from like a punishment-based response that they kind of currently really do to more of the trauma-informed, mental health-centered approach? Like, what are some active ways, some implementations that they can bring to the schools now to really make that a thing?
So this is probably one of the things, I have a lot of things that I'm proud of in my career, but this is probably one of the things that I'm most proud of, because there's some research out there for the school to prison pipeline and talk about how discipline affects a child's ability to even graduate from high school and their engagement with the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. There's also some great work around the adultification of Black girls, because usually when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, it's more centered on Black boys. Right. But there's some work about how Black girls are punished at a higher rate than even Black boys are because of the adultification mindset about Black women beforehand. And so I had a wonderful opportunity to engage in a lot of research around that and really a lot of work about addressing those particular issues. And so one of the things that I did was I actually helped to rewrite policy on discipline, and I made it where we were not able to suspend children in elementary school at all, unless, it was a serious enough offense where they were harming themselves and harming others. And if they were in fact, we had to put things in place where they were trained and, provided with, if they were out, we were, coming up with a plan for how they will be, learn how to, do things differently. It wasn't that you were just suspended and you go home and you come back. But if they were saying, hey, if they had to sit out, it was because we had to schedule a meeting to go over what the supports that are going to be put in place. I do say that you cannot change policy and say no suspensions are allowed, right? Without having additional levels of support. So one of the other things that I did was I was able to work hard to obtain funding where I was able to put a full-time school counselor in every building, increase the number of I call them trauma-informed clinicians because I had both social workers and mental health licensed professional counselors as a part of my team, but I use a tiered approach based on the needs of the school and the community about what level of supports that were allowed for each particular school. I created what I call treatment teams in each building where we would do walkthroughs to kind of figure out what was the culture and climate of the building, what support educators needed to have in order to them to de-escalate situations instead of escalate situations, as well as put supports in place where students were trained on how to manage their own emotions and support their peers. So it was a comprehensive approach. It was a 5-year strategic plan that I was able to put in place and implement, and it was a beautiful experience, and we saw the benefits of that. But it takes, like I said, intentionality. You can't just do one part of it and say, hey, we're going to change the policy, and okay, but then the kids they don't know how to manage their own emotions. There's no support in place. There's no support for the educators. The educators are not trained. And then so you're going to have total chaos in buildings. And so then you're going to have more teacher burnout and teachers leaving the profession when you don't have those levels of support. So you've got to have both. So you've got to have funding in order for you to have the supports necessary in schools, as well as a change in policy. There's a research committee that did some work around developing trauma-informed schools, and it was called the Missouri Model for Trauma-Informed Education, and it outlined like this rubric that lets you look at the different levels of where you are, and you're able to grade the different schools on their different their journey of getting to be in a trauma-informed environment. And so we utilized that rubric as our rubric to, score our schools. And it was 33 schools that we were working with to implement this model. And so we saw the difference from, year 1 to year 3 about, the difference that it makes. But it has to be in a very intentional approach to working with schools. And, said it takes a lot. And so this is a very sensitive conversation for educators, because principals are like, hey, I got so much on my plate. I'm trying to increase, trying to work with my staff to, increase their content knowledge and their supports to be able to increase academic, in classroom. I got pressure, from the district office for my students to do well. I don't have time to have a conversation with little Johnny about his feelings when he's cussing kids out and tearing up my building, right? And so, it's easy for us to say you need to be trauma informed, but if you don't have the resources necessary to, to put those things in place, it becomes a challenge. But I'm saying all that to say it's something that needs to be done. It's something that if you focus on the emotion needs of kids, academics are going to go up every time. And so that's why that was so important to me, that we did that work, and I'm excited about the work and the impact that it had on students and families in that community.
Good stuff. I love that. So that was really effective for them to really change the
change the trajectory. Exactly.
I love that. Okay, so I think what's often misunderstood when interpreting behavioral issues in students, especially like neurodiverse youth or youth of color, like what are some of those, what would you say are some of those things that's really most misunderstood about them?
Well, I think for the most part, right? So when you are coming into a community, right? And I say this, in my presentations, you coming into a community, right? Students that experience a lot of trauma, or students that have, some, chemical imbalances or things of that nature in the brain, different things, and you haven't dealt with that before, right? Your first your first response is to take it personally, right? So I give this example, and people like, Dr. Woodley, there's something wrong with you. But like, say, you remember years ago, and I know you guys are a little younger than myself, but years ago, there used to be, I think it was called the Waltons of the show, and then at night, you remember it was like a lot of kids, and they were like, good night, John Boy, good night,
I remember that.
I know, good morning, John Boy, like all the siblings, good morning, Mom, good morning, Dad. Everybody's happy-go-lucky and all this kind of good stuff, right? So imagine if you grew up in, that type of environment where, hey, everybody's happy, there's no issues, whatever. You always had what you needed, and if you didn't, you had parents that provided for that. And you have a child that's, coming from, a situation where they may be hungry. They might, they probably had to sleep in the car at night, or, the parents were arguing before they even got, woke up and all this kind of stuff. And they come in to the classroom, right? And so you're like, good morning, Johnny. And Johnny says, shut the fuck up talking to me.
Ooh.
Right? You're going to be like, what's going on? Like, what's happening? What's wrong with this child? All this kind of good stuff. So you're going to take it personally, right? Absolutely. Instead of being able to say, what's wrong with you? You know what I'm saying? Instead of saying, what happened? How can I help? Why did you respond to me in this way? And being able to take the time to unpack that. And I believe is the main issue is lack of training on behalf of the educator to be able to understand that, what's going on with that child, not take it personally, right? And just, like I said before, being able to say, hey, I have the opportunity to change the trajectory for this child because in the way that I respond. I don't have to respond out of my own emotions, right, about how this made me feel because they embarrassed me in front of the other kids in the class and all this kind of stuff. A lot of discipline that takes place against students is because adults' feelings got hurt.
Yep. And I think that kind of speaks to what you were saying before about you can't be pouring from an empty cup. So if your cup is full, that what had just happened, that wasn't about you.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with you.
So you can take the time to pause and kind of step back and say, okay, wait a minute now.
Yeah.
We don't talk to each other like that. What's going on?
And you don't have to address it in the moment. You know what I'm saying? You can go ahead and go on about your day. There should be a system, developing a system in place where there's somebody that maybe the child may not be ready for class right now. They may need to go and decompress and unpack whatever's happening before they return to class. But being able to create those systems and understand is important for, for the educator as well as, the school community to be able to navigate spaces when you have students that are facing challenges in behavior.
Now that takes a lot of emotional intelligence.
Fighting words to me like, hold up, John.
It's like, baby, you can go ahead and leave the classroom and go down to the principal. Because at that point you gotta get some classroom control because everybody gonna be like, oh, that's what we can talk to her like that. Huh?
But that's what you feel like you need to, but you don't, right? You know what I'm saying? You're able to say, okay, Johnny, right now we're not gonna address that class. Let's get focused. Let's do what we need to do. And then after you're able to have that quiet conversation with Johnny and work through whatever you need to work with, then Johnny has to pay retribution and come back to the class and say, hey, I'm sorry about my behavior. I was disrespectful to the teacher and I disrupted the classroom environment. Are you willing, if you guys are willing to accept my apology and allow me to come back into the space? You know what I'm saying? So being able to create those environments, and that is a classroom culture. When I was a principal, I would tell my students, okay, hey, we have a room here, a conflict. This is where we deal with conflict. We don't deal with conflict in my hallways. We don't deal with conflict in my classroom. We don't deal with conflicts in the lunchroom. We deal with conflict in this room. This is a conference room, and it's where you deal with conflict. If you have a problem with my teachers, you don't check my teachers. You come to me and say, hey, I'm having difficulty with a teacher. I need to be able to have a conversation about what's happening. If you have a conversation, issue with another student, we will have somebody come in and have those conversations. But if you develop that culture in your building day one before they even go in the classroom, so this is how we conduct business, and this is why we do things the way we do, then we're able to address things in a certain way. And then other students will actually say, oh, this is not okay. This is not what we do here, because they understand as well. So it's about the whole changing the culture and the climate of the organization in which you're working with.
I love that. Okay. Okay. So how can educators, staff distinguish between willful defiance and a mental health crisis?
Well, I think that that's not your role.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? To unpack, whether or not a child is being, willfully defiant, because willfully defiance could be, I'm feeling like I need to protect myself in this regard. And it may be, I'm trying to save face because I can't read. You know what I'm saying? It could be many different things. You know what I'm saying? I don't want you to know what I have going on. So I don't think that is the space and the posture that we need to take with students. But our whole focus should be, hey, listen, this is the culture and the climate of our classroom or our school building. And if you're having difficulty being able to engage in these spaces, let's find out why. Let's get you the support that you need and figure out how you can thrive, because I want you to be successful. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to do everything in my power to support you, but I need you to support me as well. And if this is not the environment for you, let's find out what will be a great environment for you. And that's why I think it's so powerful, when we talk about school choice, having different types of schools and different type of experiences, because we can't have a one-size-fits-all model to support all students. Some students are not going to do well in a traditional setting. That's why alternative education is so very powerful. That's why, hey, it may be a situation where your child will do better in Montessori, where they're able to work at their own pace independently and they don't have to follow a strict schedule. So you need to be able to kind of identify what the needs of the particular child is and address that, and not so much focus on behavior, because behavior is not the disease. It's a symptom of the disease. It's not the problem. It's a symptom of a bigger problem. And so how do we identify, hey, what is the problem is, and how do we develop solutions or prescription to support the students in navigating the problem?
So what you're saying is, in something like that, so if there's a child that they're going through something clearly, right? When is the appropriate time? Is it to call, the parents and try to do an aside conversation? Yeah. Is it more appropriate to try to, because I'm kind of on the fence about talking to them without the parent involved necessarily, right? But how does that conversation go? Yeah. So you can really kind of delve into it. And does a mental health, professional need to be in the space so it doesn't get?
I think number one, for me, I do things a little different, right? As a former administrator. Before you ever step foot in the classroom, I'm going to have a meeting with you and your mom, or you and your guardian. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to do a psychosocial intake. I'm going to find out everything I need to know, who you're living with. Because if you're not living with your mom, chances are something's going on, right? If you transfer schools in the middle of the year, chances are something's deeper is going on. So I'm going to have conversations about what's happening and what supports the family needs before you even step foot in the classroom. So say if I'm a new principal to a building, my summer, I'm going to be spending with appointments with all my families. And if I'm not able to, if I have too many families, I'm not able to do it personally myself, then I'm going to have my school counselor involved or my assistant principal, and we're going to have a caseload that we're going to meet with every family, because I'm going to know everything that's going on. Right? So I'm able to put things in place. I know I need an anger management group. I know I got 50 kids whose parents are incarcerated and may have some issues going on. I got, these number of families that, families may be sick and may be having difficulty and need food insecurities, all these different things. I'm going to have all that information before school even starts for me. And then as students come in and check in the middle of the year, we're going to, before you even are given a schedule, I'm going to have meetings with you before you even be put in the classroom, right?
Proactive approach.
Very. Yes. And so that's my approach, because I want the families, the mother, to know when I call you, I'm calling you out of a place of love for your kid. You know what I'm saying? That, hey, so you already met me. You already know my personality, right? You already know, because I'm going to tell you, listen, we don't do that here. I see your record. I see what you've done in other schools. Listen, talk to me about that fight you had. Why are you getting this fight? So tell me what happened. Tell me what you would do differently. Okay. Tell me what you need. So I'm going to have those conversations up front. And so I believe if you put those types of things in place and be proactive, you're able to develop communities that you need to. But in the instance that you are not in those situations, you haven't put that things in place, of course, the first conversation is going to be, Mom, little Johnny had a bad day today. I'm a little concerned. This is what happened. Can you give me some ideas of, does he act, does he act like this at home? Is it, does he have, when he gets upset about things, how does he he respond? What do you do? How do you de-escalate him? You know, I'm going to try to get input from the parent, okay? And then I'm like, okay, we have these particular opportunities in place, and, you know, is it okay for us to have him, do a check-in in the mornings with the school counselor to see how he's doing, and and we're going to develop a behavior contract. So he'll check in every day and discuss what's going on, those types of things. I'm gonna create a prescription with you in mind to be able to say what have worked for you. These are some supports we had at school, and develop a plan for your child. And so that's how I'm going to approach it in order for us to always be on the same page, and we always, be together. And it may be situations where, hey, mom, is it okay if we get him a mentor? You know what I'm saying? And, whatever, we're going to put him in a boys group,
Brainstorm,
like different things to kind of, see what we need to do to make a difference in the lives of your child. So, so that's the approach. It's never, looking down on the parent or whatever the parent situation is. It is, how do we collaborate together?
Yes. Okay. So collaboration with the parent, but also listening to allowing the student to have a voice.
Correct.
Yeah, and hearing them so they can kind of collaborate too. It's a whole collaborative process. I
Correct.
Love that. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. You kind of spoke to this, so it's more of a proactive, not reactive behavior support
Yes.
plan. So I'll go past that because we were asking about that. That was going to be one of the questions, but I think let's pivot into the family support piece.
Yes.
So, can you speak to what message you might be able to give a caregiver who feels guilty for needing help themselves?
Yeah. So one of the things, like I said, I always love to, meet with parents to figure out what's going on or what have you, and, be very transparent so we can find out what supports are needed. One of the first things I did as principal was I collaborated with an organization that Ubuntu does partner with as a lead partner for mental health. And I have them to have an office in my school. So I had Odyssey Family Counseling to have an office in my school to be able to support students and families, whether or not they had insurance or not. So it may be a situation where the parent and the child was just having conflict or whatever. So we automatically provide them with, supports where the parent and the child is able to, do counseling sessions together, right? The same thing. The parent may be dealing with job loss and things of that nature, had a family support specialist on staff to be able to work with the parent on navigating job searches and, needing food and different things. Like I said, I would have, people come in that sign, be able to sign people up for food stamps or, those types of things right there in the building, so they didn't have to try to navigate those things alone. So I think the main thing is understanding your community, right? Being able to say, what are the issues? What are the concerns in our community? How do we utilize our supports? I truly believe that a school system or any organization, the way you budget your finances tells me your priorities, right? And so my main thing is, if your priority is students and families, then I'm going to look at my budget and I'm going to identify, hey, I have, when I look at my, my data, you know what I'm saying, I got X number of families that's below the poverty level. So that's, housing may be an issue, food, insecurity may be an issue, these types of things. So I'm going to plan my budget around how to support those families in order for them to get what they need. And so that comes with those phone calls and those check-ins. Hey, this is so-and-so, this, it's been a month, just checking in, let you know, I appreciate, having your student here. We have these particular resources at the school. We would love for you to come be a part of that. We have these, parenting classes in the building that you can be a part of. Let us know how we can support you and your family. Being able to put it out there to create that culture of caring and understanding that, hey, we have these, resources in place. If you need these services, please let us know. We created a situation, especially for our families that were food insecure, that, on Fridays, our students came to a particular room, got a book bag full of food to take home for the weekend, right? And because we knew that these families were having difficulty, and their parents said, yes, that would be a help for us and our families. It wasn't a big deal. We didn't, advertise, Johnny, come down here and get some food, right? They just grabbed a book bag, and on Mondays they brought the book bag back, and the next week we filled it up with food, and so they would have food to last them over the weekend.
Nice.
Makes sense.
So this one's kind of not on my thing, but I do want to ask, how do you navigate, or how could some educators, schools navigate the parents who are just not involved? They don't care. They're not answering the phone calls. They're not doing any of those things.
Well, I never believe, and so like I said, I'm going to be an advocate. Like, I don't believe there's no bad kids. I don't believe there's no bad parents, right? Okay. I feel like parents are doing the best that they can with the information that they have. Now, you have parents who are dealing with addiction, so they're not able to be the parent they need to be because that's their priority, is feeding that addiction. You have families that are alcoholics, and that's their priority. Or you have parents that are dealing with depression, and that's their priority. And so their kids can't be their priority, right? Mm-hmm. And so with that being said, a couple of things that I have put in place when I found students that were involved in situations where they had parents that could not, be their best self or be their best parent for the child, is put systems of support internally to be able to support them. So we would do things like have advisories where teachers adopt certain students to be their person. Yeah. So when parent-teacher conferences came around, hey, your parent may not show up, but Miss So-and-so is going to meet with your teacher to find out what's happening with your kid. Hey, listen, come here, and one of the main thing is, as an educator, I had a breakdown one day. I was in an auditorium, all the kids was in there, and I looked out in the audience and realized that I'm not going to be able to save every child. And I just broke down, started crying, and the kids like, what's wrong, Dr.? But it just broke my heart. It was like, no matter how many hours a day I work, no matter how hard I work, I'm not going to be able to save every child, right? And it was just like a download from me from heaven that I may not be able to save every child, right? But I got 50 staff members, right? And if we got 500 kids in this building, if each one of us take 10 kids and say we're going to do everything in our power to support these kids, then guess what? We'll save more than we lose, right? And so, and then I began to look at the community, right? To be able to say who in the community that I could collaborate with. What are the churches? How can I see, who in the churches, that could come, and they have, these male groups and all these different things, and just kept creating these levels of support so we could save as many kids as we could and make as much of a difference as we can. And I think that is the piece, because understanding that, hey, we do have situations in our community where people are faced with so many different barriers that they're not able to show up and be their best self for the kids. But if we, the ones that can focus on what's in our control and create spaces of supports and those circles of supports to say, hey, guess what? I got you. I'm going to show up. I'm going to be there. Guess what? I'm not going to let you fail. I'm going to do everything in our power to support you. Then you still create that caring adult that's, to make a difference in the lives of that child, even if that parent can't be that person for them in the moment.
I love that.
It's giving community building.
Yeah.
So, ladies, I think we have time for about one more question.
Okay. Well, I'll hit it with my last.
Okay.
So what are some health challenges that you see with single parents, particularly with neurotypical children, but also specifically with some neurodiverse children?
Yes.
How can they protect their own well-being, their children's well-being? What are some things they can do to navigate all that space?
Yeah. I would say, when you are not being afraid to ask for help, right? Do not being afraid to ask for help. There's programs, Parents Night Out, some different things that you can tap into, and resources, because, you've got to prioritize having some time. One of the main things, and, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is a big deal. The main thing I see from single parents, or even people that are married, because, usually the mothers are the ones that's caring for the child, even if you have a spouse in the house, is sleep deprivation, right? And so when you are sleep deprived, it's worse than being, driving drunk and all those different things. And so that sleep deprivation for long periods of time begin to affect your own ability to cognitively think, make good decisions, things of nature. Yes.
Well,
It just
heal your body too.
correct.
It starts to affect your health. And,
Yeah, digestion, all kind of pieces. So that's one of the main things. And of course, when you think about burnout, even depression, anxiety shows up in those spaces when you're finding yourself being overwhelmed with trying to juggle and be all things to all people. So I say all that to say, being able to reach out, find resources, being vulnerable to be able to say, hey, and it's so interesting when you open up and say, I need help with this. It seems like, help, finds its way, to you and to be able to kind of navigate those spaces. But I think the main issue is not, feeling like I've got to hold everything inside. And like we talked about earlier, the body keeping score, it is going to manifest itself in medical issues and things going up. And then you're not going to be able to be there and support your kid the way they need to be supported. But the main issue is, like I said, being sleep deprivation, not being able to sleep because you're so busy trying to manage everything that it becomes so overwhelming. It starts to disrupt all of your cognitive patterns.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Woodley. And of course, as we are ending, we want to know, how can people get connected with you and your work? Did we mention that Dr. Woodley's also an author and has authored several books?
Well, drlatishawoodley.com is my website. You can reach out to me to learn about the work that I do and everything. And any of the books and things I've written are available on Amazon and on Barnes and Nobles and all of the sites and things of that nature. But it's just an honor and a privilege to be able to, engage and do this work. I wake up every day excited about the work that I've been able to do, and I'm able to live my passion. And so I'm just grateful for the opportunity to serve.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you, Dr. Woodley. We love you and appreciate you. And thank you all for listening. And our next episode, we are actually going to be interviewing some PCI students. So tune in for that next episode. And we're super excited. Thank you.
All right. Bye.